In this video, we'll record a macro, assign it to different objects in Excel, and then compare absolute and relative recording to understand how each method affects the behavior of the macro. Let's begin with a standard macro recording. On the Developer tab, I click Record Macro, give it a name, and press OK. Excel now records every step I take. I'll type text into cell A1, change the font color, apply bold formatting, and change the background color. When I'm done, I stop the recording. Excel has now created a macro based on everything I did. We can open the Visual Basic editor to see the result. Inside a new module, we'll find a procedure with the name we assigned. The code contains a lot of select and selection statements, and that's completely normal. The macro recorder captures our clicks, not the most efficient way of writing code. Now that the macro is recorded, let's assign it to something on the worksheet. I'll insert a simple square shape, right-click it, and choose Assign Macro. I select the macro I just recorded, and now clicking the shape runs the macro. Shapes are flexible visual objects. You can assign macros to rectangles, circles, icons, smart art, and even images. Next, let's assign the same macro to a Form Control button. When I insert a Form Control button from the Developer tab, Excel immediately asks which macro to assign. This highlights the main difference. Shapes are purely visual elements that we convert into clickable objects, while form controls are actual interface components built specifically for automation. They behave consistently, support linked cell properties, and follow Excel's standard UI rules. Now let's explore an important option in macro recording: use relative references. By default, Excel records macros using absolute references, meaning it stores exact cell addresses. If I type something in a specific cell during recording, for example A10, the macro will always go back to A10 when it runs, regardless of where my cursor is at the time. Absolute macros always target fixed locations. When I enable relative references, Excel records actions relative to the starting point instead of fixed addresses. Let's record a second macro using this mode. With relative references turned on, I click Record Macro. I type into A10, move one cell down, and type again. When I stop the recording, the code uses the active cell and offsets, rather than hard-coded addresses. Now that this relative macro is recorded, let's assign it just like we did before. I insert a new shape, for example a circle, right-click it, and choose Assign Macro. This time, I select the macro we recorded with relative references enabled. The difference becomes clear as soon as we test it. Clicking this shape runs the macro relative to whichever cell is currently active. If my cursor is on C5, the macro writes data to C5 and then C6. If I start on F10, the macro writes into F10 and then F11. The macro adapts to the user's starting position because it doesn't rely on absolute cell references anymore. It uses relative positioning. To summarize the difference, absolute recording always uses fixed cell addresses, while relative recording uses the active cell as the starting point, making the macro flexible and dynamic.